Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you won't see the show on your TV, so we talk about things musically. Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you're listening to Jams and Tea.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new Record Club episode of the Jams and Tea podcast. If you haven't seen our episode that aired earlier today on this week's releases, which are, of course, Steven Wilson's The Future Bites and Weezer's OK Human, go check that out because it's a good episode. But now we are doing the Record Club, which is Saoirse's. Saoirse, why don't you tell us a little bit about what this record is, why you recommended it, set the stage a bit for who Mr. Gerard Way is.
This might be a surprise to you guys, but when I was a teenager, I kind of liked My Chemical Romance quite a bit.
I can't imagine being a teenager and liking the Black Parade. Never.
What do you want about?
Nobody.
Who would do that?
It could never happen. And of course, when they broke up, it was kind of shit. And especially when I heard like the reason they broke up, and I hope one day we're going to do B-sides on My Chem and I'm going to cover some ground that we're going to cover on that episode when we do it now. But basically, the reason they broke up was when Gerard Way formed the band, he envisioned the 3 arc from their first to the Black Parade, and then the way he put it, they were going to walk off into the sunset. And basically, after that point, of course, they totally reinvented themselves, as he is wont to do, but that was all kind of off the cuff. And the concept for that 5th record was going to be a group of grief counseling people in, like the Hereditary scene where they're all talking about people they've lost and they all talk about their dead children. And it was just too grim and they're all having a shit time. So they basically called day on the project. You can hear one song that they recorded for the album called Fake Your Death, which was on their greatest hits compilation. And
a jolly tune.
Yeah, I personally am a fan of that song, but in a way, like this record, I do struggle to know if that's nostalgia talking or do I generally like the record, as I'm going to get onto. I think in both cases it doesn't really matter, because I do like listening to both the song and the album. When Gerard Way announced that he was going to do a record, I was, of course, very excited. And then he announced that he was going to take influences from shoegaze and Britpop on the record, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, threw me for one. And then the record came out, and there were some songs I liked and some I wasn't too keen on. But then Gerard Way's first solo gig was going to open the Reading Festival, the year I had already booked tickets to attend. This is a 3-day festival. He was going to open it by being the first act to play. It was going to be his first solo gig. And I did it, and it was one of the best times I've ever had. And so many of these songs were opened up to me appeal-wise by that gig. And I normally, when we do one of these, I at least know something about what you guys think of the record before we record. So we talk about it a bit. I have no idea what any of you think of this record. So I'm going to open up the floor and see what you thought.
I guess I'm probably the second most familiar with Gerard Way on this podcast.
Sounds right.
Got way into him 7th and 8th grade. Were my favorite band for a while. I've heard all four. It's just 4 albums. Yeah,
I think 4.
There's 4 and a compilation of unreleased singles.
Yeah, I've heard those too. Heard all of that stuff about a bajillion times. Was on the hype train for this record when it came out, and I enjoyed it. Then it was not what I was looking for in a new Gerard Way, My Chemical Romance adjacent project. I remember thinking that then, not really an opinion I hold now with all of the distance between all of that. But suffice it to say, I think my opinion on the record is more or less the same as it was then. As it's like, it's fine. I think there are a handful of great songs on here. I think the singles, Action Cat and No Shows, those are fun, quite like Millions. Just really fun energetic, really sort of wall of sound-ish Britpop, Britpop alt rock tracks. But I have to say, every now and then, even on those songs, there are moments where I'm like, this just doesn't quite work for me. I think the rest of it is just like actually really comparable to my thoughts on the very first My Chemical Romance album. Really just that it's a lot of first album syndrome problems. A lot of stuff feels kind of underdeveloped. I think it lacks a certain focus sonically, but it also shows, interestingly enough, for someone as storied career-wise at the point that this came out, it showed a lot of potential for a lot of room for growth. And instead of doing that, Mr. Way has done, not that, which is disappointing because it leaves Hesitant Alien in a really strange spot, I think, almost like a sort of novelty project almost, whereas it should have been the foundation laid for a career in solo work, I think. But instead it's just like, oh, this is the lead singer of My Chemical Romance's solo album. That's here's a fun little thing, side diversion to listen to. I think that's a shame because, as I said, there's a lot here to work with and a lot here to grow off of, and then he just kind of didn't. So it's really a mixed bag all around.
Well, I am not particularly stored with My Chemical Romance, other than the fact that I, like every high school person who has ever cried a lot, listened to the Black Parade quite a fair bit, actually. That was even before I was super into like albums. But there are just some things that are so culturally omnipresent that you're going to encounter them sooner or later. And now that I'm a bit more familiar with their stuff, I like a great deal of their work. It's like Head and Shoulders, the Black Parade, and then it's like just kind of everything else, which I know is a super normie take to have, but I'm just kind of like, I like it when they are less, I guess, less punk inclined and more going for like a Queen arena rock sound with like a punk tinge, which is what Black Parade is. Because I like that spirit a lot. Just, I'm a big Queen fan.
That probably speaks to why Danger Days doesn't work for you as much.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like a lot of elements of their previous sound that is just congealed in a way where I'm like, this is not for me. So I had no clue this even existed before you brought it up. And, upon listening to it, I found myself rather enjoying it. I think it's interesting because Morgan pointed out that it's like, this is not what I imagined people expected this album to sound like. Certainly wasn't how I pictured it. I just, figured like, if it's like a romance, then I'm probably going to expect something a little like that. And instead, I got something that was a little bit more interesting. Like the guitars are really loud and very often distorted. A lot of the vocal mixing also follows in kind. A lot of it has kind of the garage rock sort of feel. Some of it also reminds me of, I think specifically the song No Shows and Action Cat really make me think of the Killers. Then there's the Bureau, which I think is like, I think it's a great opener. The Bureau has like, it's this really booming, loud, almost doomy kind of riff that just keeps breaking in. And, just as a vocalist, I also find him quite compelling just because he always is. He's just got one of those very quintessential pop punk voices where it's like, kind of snotty and bratty, but also not to the point where it's like kind of abrasive. It's like not quite the lead singer of Pup, but it's also like, not all-time low or anything, just in that perfect middle ground, I think.
And it's also just, like completely unimitatable.
Yeah, it's very distinctly him. I think the only true...
He also has one of the best ranges in the genre for a male singer.
Oh, totally. And I think this like listening to this and listening to Black Parade like back to back, you can absolutely see that just because there's a bit more of a I don't know. There's a a vibe about this that at some points actually it reminded me of a lot of Jack White's solo stuff as well. Just sort of that very raucous kind of, again, garage rock sound. I think the only obstacle the album really ever presents me is the fact that I wouldn't call it front loaded. I'd actually say it just kind of dips in the middle for me. I think that the first like 4 songs are like great, and I think it really picks up with like the final 4 tracks. It's just that the 3 sort of in the middle of that are like and on an album that's not even 40 minutes, that's kind of a problem. Like, I don't particularly care for Millions. I think 00 is fine, and I think Juarez is fine, but it's sandwiched in between songs. Like, I love Drugstore Perfume. I just think that's a great song, probably the most My Chemical Romance-y sounding song, and even then, like, aesthetically, it's very different. I also like How's It Going to Be and Get the Gang Together a lot. They're just really fun songs. And I will say Maya the Psychic, not a bad song. It's just kind of a strange way to the album. I don't understand its placement. I think the album's sequenced very strangely, but just it's an interesting confluence of different influences, I guess. And for something that came out in like 2014, I'd say it's a pretty bold move to make something like that just doesn't really sound like anything that was happening in rock music that particular decade. And for that, I salute him. It's a fun album, even though it like loses just a tiny bit of for me, makes for it, I guess, in spirit and enthusiasm. I feel like the songwriting maybe is like also just kind of varies. I like the higher concept go for broke emotion of like the My Chemical Romance things, whereas here Gerard's just sort of flexing and being a bit more like not even necessarily personal, but just sort of covering topics that are a bit more humble and everyman, and I sort of like as like a musician too, so I gotta get that approach from it, but it again also just sort of like it just fails to leave a huge impact on me. That said, I think I would say that this of the albums that he's been involved in, this is probably my second favorite that I've heard. I'd put this above like the other 2 My Chemical Romance albums just because they're just not my speed. I can't really describe why. But I like the sound here a little bit more. It's a bit more eclectic. It's a bit weirder, and I fuck with it. I like it. It's pretty good. I just kind of
the other 2 MCR albums being 3 Cheers and Danger Days.
Oh, is there not another one?
There is.
Yeah,
there's I gave you my bullets, you bought me your love, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. And yeah, I mean, like I feel like I'm a bit ill-equipped just because it's like I am not like I already like I love the Black Parade, but it's also an album where I just feel like I do sort of lack the very, very strong attachment that I think maybe like Morgan in high school probably had to something like that. Because it was
in high school.
Yeah, I mean like most people in general, because it's like I feel like this just sort of has a limited mileage with me to begin with, and it's just like it can only be so good, and it is. It's just something that I'm more appreciative for what it does than what it is. And I guess I kind of sympathize with Morgan in the sense that I wish Gerard kind of followed up on it and tried to pursue this a little bit more definitively, because I think it could have been the start of something great for him. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a tragedy, but it's still, we got a good record out of it. So I can't really complain too much, I guess.
Yeah, like, I'm not going to start reviewing it now, so I want to wait until the end, but, I would agree in as much as I feel very, I mean, I know Gerard Way has gone on like a spiritual journey that's made him much happier, and good for him. But my God, if this sound had been refined more, I would maybe like it, if anything, more. But I do also like the roughness of it, I suppose.
Yeah, it has a charm in its unkemptness that I don't really find with the first 2 My Chemical Romance albums, that like I think that a lot of people like them for that reason, whereas it's sort of different for me, whereas here it works for whatever reason. I don't really know.
No, actually, one of the key themes that keeps being returned to on this record is the dichotomy between sort of like hedonism and sort of spiritual self-care.
Yeah, there's definitely like I feel like the writing, maybe like while it doesn't go for broke big emotions, arena rock anthemic shit, it's also inherently more personal, I guess. And I just wish he could maybe have been given the opportunity to do that in a more fleshed out capacity throughout his career, because it's like if he kept going down that road, I think he might be able to chalk up something fully spectacular about it.
Yeah, like what it
as
is at the
it's
moment
good.
is less what at the moment for me it's less what Morgan said of being a novelty record, but more like an unexplored direction he could have gone in. I think.
Yeah.
That would have been very cool. I mean, there are
Right.
plenty of bands with records like that.
My point with the novelty is that because it's unexplored, it would come off more as a novelty, maybe to
Sure.
unfamiliar.
Yeah, no, that's very fair enough. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I
He's the boy.
suppose that's me.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, Jake, if you were ill-equipped, I am running naked into
August is not a My Chemical Romance fan. Who could have
Crazy.
seen this coming?
Yeah, I've never listened to anything they've done, really.
I can't imagine you'd fuck with it, really.
No.
Yeah, and I kind of know that because I'm not.
I mean, yeah, like my thought process is like you like the first Coheed album, so you'd probably enjoy 3 Cheers to some degree.
You make a good point there. That's fair.
But I also wouldn't be like you should listen to this like I would with the first Coheed album. So
Okay. Yeah, it's like maybe put it on at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, so I'm not terribly familiar with them, and I will say from what I've heard from Jake and Morgan, I do agree with the general sentiment that this is like kind of an interesting point in like it feels this could have been something taken a bit further, and I guess I'll get into my thing proper and address that in a second. It opens with the Bureau, which I thought was it's a fun song with like quite a good bit of energy behind it. And I mean, generally what I understand is kind of the case behind this record is that a lot of it was intentionally recorded with a bit poorer quality instruments and recording methods to give it this more retro, old-timey sound. That's at least what I've understood in reading up on this record, and I think that certainly adds to this record to a degree. It like lends, I think, to the production in tracks like Action Cat, where the vocals kind of bleed together and it becomes a bit homogenous. I think that's an interesting sound. I think just for me the problem is that's also what all of it sounds like to me. I just wish it had maybe had more of a standard recording, because I think these ideas would be much better if they were more easy to parse out from each other. And because I think as it is, it just I feel the whole thing sounds a bit too muddy for me to get like a really proper handle on a lot of these songs and like properly dive into and enjoy them. And I do kind of like some of the lyrical themes, how it's kind of a reflection back on the My Chemical Romance catalog, and how it's kind of had a negative psychological impact on Mr. Way. And I think Jake made a good point about this, how it was kind of like, this album's got a bit of a personal slant to it, and I can appreciate that. Yeah, I guess I don't find it like, I find it just a hair obnoxious more than anything. It kind of grates on me after long enough, especially that section in the middle Jake mentioned, where I think it becomes a little devoid of individual personality for all of the songs. But yeah, overall, I mean, it's an interesting enough album. It's certainly something I'd put way out of my ballpark to really properly comment on. And I mean, I get that people can get a real kick out of this, real happiness, a real enjoyment. I just not really getting it myself.
God, I'm shocked.
I know,
How
right?
Understandable.
dare
Have a
you?
nice day.
Crazy. Yeah, I mean, I at least thought sort of maybe like the more sort of fuzzier, noisier stuff would appeal to August a bit more. I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of worked for me to a
mean-
point.
I'm shocked it worked for him as well as it did.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Well, look, I mean, no bones about it. I have an intense fondness for this record. It was actually quite well received at the time. Made a couple of albums of the year lists and some musical publications. And again, it took me a little bit to warm up to it in a way because it is just not what I was expecting. But now, even I can acknowledge some of the tracks are better than others, but even the less good tracks, I still do have a real fondness and appreciation for, I suppose. The Bureau is a really strange, awkward opener. It's sort of both like hellish and noisy and bluesy and grungy. It feels like the house band for a dive bar in hell at points. With noises like scratching guitars and telephone ringing over the top. It just adds this real sense of chaos. There is a strange way to open an album like this, but I think it does work. It's a cut you couldn't really put anywhere else on the record, that's for certain. And this goes into track 2, the lead single, Action Cat, which I've always had an intense liking for. It pulls...
It sounds exactly the way you would imagine a song called Action Cat to sound.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Well, it is, for start, this intense wall of fuzz on you. And it's like for one section where it kind of cuts away. It doesn't stop. It has all of these sort of random images that individually mean nothing, but together for me paint a picture of nostalgia and loss. Especially with the ringing chorus. If you don't ask a lot, you won't lose a lot, and we can make it up again. It's a song that I cannot help but scream along to every time I hear it. And the key of this being the lead single, after My Chemical Romance were broken up for a fair few years, is the refrain, "Do you miss me? Because I miss you," which always really affected me in a metatextual way, listening to it, because it felt like a reaching across the aisle of artist and fan, I suppose. And it's such an intensely nostalgic sounding track. It can't help but feel like it's harkening back to another time. It's not the only time I'm going to say this on the record. Get track 3, No Shows, almost reaches into glam for influences at points. Again, with a lot of effects pedals, a lot of noise, but more of a spaced out atmospheric cut meant to play to huge audiences live, which is the best version of this I've heard is in my memory in the Gerard Way live concert when I relive that in my head. But it's still, for me, a great song. Takes also influences from Britpop, probably the most on the record. It feels like a song that yearns out for a deeper connection, savoring the smaller good things. Gerard Way has talked about the fact that this song came out purely out of wanting to write a song with a drum fill that goes, and to have the song just stop for that one drum moment, and the whole rest of the song mushroomed around that. And I think that in a way encapsulates the appeal to this record for me, in that every choice is not maybe necessarily influenced by what's like logically the best thing, or how do we best realize the artistic vision for this record. It's what am I drawn to, what is fun, what is satisfying to hear. And again, this is an album with not just one sax solo on this song, but 2, and they're both wonderful. They're both wonderful to me. I am a sucker for a sax solo. Another song that I love because it does a thing that I am just a sucker for in music is track 5 Millions, with the snares coming on the 1 and the 3 instead of the 2 and the 4 in the bar. It's something that always I'm attracted to in music. it's also just an infectiously fun song for me. It's so eminently ridiculous with its wailing, yelled intro. And it's another song that feels like things were done because they feel fun, like the call and responses with the layered vocals in this song. It's just infectious to me. And of course, the song Brother, on which Gerard Way's brother and bandmate in My Chemical Romance, Mikey, does some of the instrumentation, feels like a song about remembering a time when things were better through comradeship with someone and understanding you can never go back there. And it's a very sad song that I love. I love the way that the piano melody is led in the left hand on the bass. And it leads you through this actually kind of sort of complex series of emotional textures just by the piano. And I do love it. And again, there's a really aggressively fuzzy and noisy middle eight in this song that could feel like a sonic diversion, a sort of sonic divergence or a misstep, but just feels like the emotional climax of the song for me. Tracks 6 and 7, I will concur, are the least substantial cuts on the record in terms of what you can get out of them. But the walls of noise and sort of dour, grungy instrumentation that they give you carry them for me, along with Gerard Way yelling, "I can't swim" at incredible volume on Juarez, as if he was as if he was in the room with James Maynard Keynes telling him off. I love track 8, Drugstore Perfume. It's a wonderful ballad for me. Get the Gang Together. It's a fun, fuzzy burner of a song, a bruiser of a song that creeps and crawls, and another sax solo. It's so much fun. It's so much fun, Jan. Track 10, how it's gonna be. Shimmering rollicker with so much reverb on the vocals you could drown in it. I love the synth solo. It feels like a throwback to songs like Send the Cavalry and those sort of cheesy 80s pop songs, but with a deep sense of loving nostalgia. Looking back at this kind of music is slightly more sincere than maybe some of it was at the time. And I think it works beautifully. It sets the scene at the beginning perfectly. Across the city, steam and light of a runway to the manufactured night. It just puts you right there, and the glistening music really helps sell that dreamy artificial quality of it. It's almost like you're inside a dream sequence in Mulholland Drive or something. And yeah, track 11, it could be a strange moment to end on, but for me, it's a frivolous up note that uses a character that it shows a lot of love for as a metaphor for being young and dumb and thinking you're better than everyone else, which is something that My Chemical Romance's music really appealed to in a lot of people, of just feeling young and full of energy, and feeling like you can take on the world while still being miserable. And it ends on a really lovely note for me. As I alluded to earlier, it's hard for me to tell how much my love for this record is rooted in nostalgia. What I come down to is I don't care. I still love listening to it. I didn't expect it to go down like the highest rated record we've ever done. I did this for me so I could talk about it, and I'm glad I did it.
I mean, that's what this show is for. I mean, one of its many purposes, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have known this record existed and without your input, and I enjoyed it, so.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Did you think I had more reasons for putting Hand Cannot Erase in the record club position than spilling the contents of my entire life out on air? I didn't.
Only fair you do it after we have.
Yeah, I mean, also,
August is up next.
Yeah, bass had total self-indulgence.
Well, yeah, no, and I love that Basshead record. I was really happy
it's
to talk
good.
about it.
Yeah.
All right, so is that everyone?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've said my piece.
Unless
let's go in Jam's
comment.
order.
Okay, my 3 favorite tracks are probably going to be Drugstore Perfume, The Bureau, and No Shows. Least favorite, probably 0-0. And I give the album a 7.
Hey, August.
Favorites are probably The Bureau, Action Cat, and the third one on there, I forget what it's called.
It's called No Shows.
No Shows. Yeah, that one's all right. Least favorite, I don't really have one, just kind of for lack of like, and nothing really sticks out to me as like measurably worse than anything else. So it's about a 5 from me. Sorry to say.
My 3 favorites. For whatever reason, I forgot to mention my favorite in my review, which is How's It Going to Be? Which, to me, I think is the only one of these that really stands up with the best of My Chemical Romance stuff. I love that song. I kind of think of it as like if Simon and Garfunkel were making music in the 80s and had a full band with them eventually, that's what it would sound like. And I think lyrically it really sort of evokes that as well. And I'm sure that's on purpose because I know Wei is a fan. You know, who the fuck doesn't like Simon and Garfunkel? But yeah, other 2, I'll say Millions and No Shows. Least favorite, Get the Gang Together does nothing for me. Probably gonna go with that one. And 6 out of 10.
Neat. Oh, okay. So my 3 favorite tracks are Action Cat. I'm gonna say No Shows and Millions. My least favorite track, if I was forced to pick one, probably 00. And I'm gonna fuck it, you know. I'm gonna slap a 10 on this. Fuck it.
Yeah, right. Fuck not.
Right, and that gives it a 7 out of 10,
Oot and a boot.
which is equivalent to What's Your Pleasure, Small Towns, Leanne La Havas, Al John.
That sounds about right.
And wow, high standard deviation, shocker of all shocks.
It's quite high. Yeah. Is that the highest one I've ever had? No, Charlie beats it by 0.3.
Yeah.
So once again, what are we covering next week, Jake?
Well, Tyler, it's your pick. Why don't you talk about it?
Yeah, Tyler, this is me. I'm Tyler.
Wait,
this is my
me,
Tyler, fan of Olteca. Olteca. But Tyler's pick.
The album the Cardiacs Sing to God. And
that was great. That was not bad at all.
But before that, we'll be covering on our main episodes the new Foo Fighters album, Medicine at Midnight, and the new album from a post-punk outfit, Black Country New Road. So tune in next week for that. Jermaine, Brett, Flight of the Conchords.
We'll also be reviewing my
Lord of the Rings,
New Zealand,
Frodo.
We'll also
The
be
Ring.
my new album, so look out for that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, buddy.
It's on every streaming service. It's
All of
not
them.
hard to find.
All of
Just put in the letter S and you'll see it.
Saoirse is inevitable.
Just put in ampersand, it'll come up, you know.
Ampersand. En passant.
I'll amper your
like
sand.
The chess move.
Oh.
I play it en passant.
On that note, rock
Rock
over London.
Rock on Chicago.
Fitter, happier, more productive.
Singer, the original Thai beer.